All right, welcome everyone to Mindfulness Everything. This is a show where we talk about the seven attitudes of mindfulness by John Kabat-Zinn. And not just talk about the attitudes, we'll also explore how we can really embody and practice these attitudes in our everyday lives. My name is Han Yi. I'm the host. I'm also a performance psychologist and a mindfulness instructor myself. And today we're very excited to have Ming Hui, a mindfulness instructor herself. And maybe I'll just invite her. Welcome, Ming Hui.
Hi, Han Yi. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, that's great that you can join us. Why don't I just invite you to introduce yourself to our audience?
Okay, sure. Yeah, so hi everyone. I'm Ming Hui. As Han Yi mentioned, I am a mindfulness teacher. I'm also a leadership coach and a trainer. Maybe I should also mention that I'm a mother of two. Uh, a mom, a daughter, a friend. Really, pretty much like everyone else.
Mm, that's great. Thank you for introducing yourself. So maybe why don't we start? I've always been curious about how you uh, got started in this mindfulness journey. Would you like to share with us your story on how you got into this space?
Yeah, sure. So I've been meditating for a long time, in fact, since uni days actually. But I think um, not incorporating, I guess, some of the attitudes that you have just introduced. Not because I didn't want to, but perhaps at that time, my understanding of meditation and mindfulness uh, wasn't as holistic as it's probably intended to be. And so I found that, coming out to working life and subsequently starting a family, things just got really, really stressful. And I was wondering why, my practice wasn't really helping me. And that was when I said, well, can we maybe go back to basics? And I signed up for an 8-week mindfulness course. I did the MBCT, Mindfulness Based Cognitive Therapy. And as they say, the rest is history. I felt that I really went back to basics and began to understand and cultivate the attitudes that come along with mindfulness, not just the skill set, the breathing, the focusing, but really inviting very gently the 7 attitudes or 9, if you like, depending on which version, um, to really make this a holistic practice for myself. And then I decided to teach.
I see. I like the phrase you use about getting back to basics, right? Yeah, maybe can you say more about that? So what does that mean for someone who is trying to cultivate a mindfulness practice?
Mm. I think it is really a journey. Yeah. And I think different people start at different places. So, give you an example. I have a friend who has been interested in mindfulness for a long time, and he would read a lot. So, there was a
Mm,
lot of theory, um, but it took him a long while before he decided that, hey, maybe I should practice, experience it. And I have another friend, so we're talking about book ends here, right? So the on the other end of the spectrum, I have another friend who has heard of mindfulness briefly, uh, never read anything about it, never heard a single podcast or talk. And just one fine day during the pandemic times when I held free mindfulness sessions for stay-at-home moms and moms who suddenly found themselves working from home. Okay, I said, "Hey, would you like to come along?" And she said, "Yes, sure." So it was from nothing, but she was really happy to try experientially. So obviously, people are at different places in their journey. Even you and I are at different places in our journey. But I think if we always begin anew and start every practice with a beginner's mind, and really treat it that there's something else for us to learn and experience, then we are going back to basics every moment. And the basics actually include not just, you know, what some people might think as the sitting down and breathing, but that there is so much more about the attitudes, especially how we treat ourselves, right? That can be
Mm,
learned. Yeah,
mm. So I remember John Kabat-Zinn mentioning about how mindfulness is about relationships, right? Relationships with other people, with our environment, but more importantly, with ourselves and our own experiences. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
and so today we're going to talk about this one of the key attitudes, which is called trust,
Mhm.
right? And so maybe just inviting Ming Hui, what are your thoughts, or what comes to mind when we think about trust?
So funnily, trust, mindfulness aside, for me personally, when we talk about values in life, trust is very, very important to me. Um, because I think trust gives you a sense of safety and groundedness, right? So, for example, I think if we simply think of somebody that we can trust, I think your breathing naturally slows down.
Mm,
Yeah. When you're with that person or even just thinking about that person, right? And there's this sense of, okay, I'm fine, I'm good, we are good, right? So if we bring it back to mindfulness in what John Kabat-Zinn calls one of the attitudes of mindfulness, I think he defines trust as um, something that we cultivate with ourselves and our own feelings. And I think that's really core and fundamental because, as you were saying just now, right? It's not just about the relationship with others. In fact, our relationship with others is an extension of our relationship with ourselves. And a whole part of our own self comprises our thoughts and our feelings. Yeah. And sometimes when we're really, really busy, or when we have too many things in our minds, okay, it's not even just the trust. We are not even sometimes aware of what's going on in the mind, churning at the background, like some background app refreshing on your phone, even though you're on a different screen, right?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And with the thoughts come a lot of feelings, and what we call feeling tones. Feeling tones are really like the moods that we are carrying in the background, right? Directly or indirectly influencing our actions, our speech, our thoughts, right? And so, if you're not even aware, let alone trust it, then sometimes we may act or speak out of habits, out of autopilot. And when we do that, and sometimes we may not act or speak too skillfully, then we're not really cultivating trust with our own self and our own feelings, isn't it? Yeah. And then we wonder why we are stressed up, and we're distressed. Well, precisely because sometimes things are happening in the background and we are not as intentional as we might like to be and not as skillful as what we might like to be.
mm. So what I'm hearing is this idea of tuning in to what our current experiences, and it's a very rich environment, different dimensions, like I mean thoughts and emotions and all that, and sort of being in touch with it, and then cultivating the ability, that being in touch as a way to cultivate trust with ourselves.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, a very cliched way of calling it may be, accessing your own inner wisdom, right? It's just that when we say that, sometimes it sounds like really big words. But if we take away that notion of it being big words, I think if we really turn in and dig deep, we know that we have a lot of inner wisdom. Think of those times when you allow yourself to take a step back. I mean, not you, of course, we are saying in general. When we allow ourselves to take a step back or let something sit for a while, you find that 2 hours later or 2 days later, something comes up and you are better able to handle a situation than if we were to um, get ourselves too caught up with it and keep churning it in our head, okay? Which sometimes is our habitual way of wanting to get rid of that discomfort of being in a situation that we do not like, right? So we're not accessing that inner wisdom, if you like. So it's not that we don't have it, it's a matter of whether um, we are in a position to access it. And that's what mindfulness is about. It's giving ourselves that headspace and that opportunity to let that wisdom surface and trust our guts, if you like.
Mm,
Okay?
mm, mm,
Yeah.
mm. I hear you, man. It's about so listening in, right? And yet, I mean, I guess the practicalities of it is that we live in an environment where we're all about feel good, get better. But yet sometimes tuning in may be uncomfortable, right? I mean, we may have to encounter our inner knots, frustration, anger, deep emotions, which may be difficult, right? And so which really just circles back, right? I mean, how can one practice this attitude of trust in our on our daily lives so that it can then extend to other parts of how we experience our day to day? Yeah. Any thoughts about that?
I think that's a really, really great question. Um, and so I think that's where, we talk about going back to basics, right?
Mm,
So when we think about um, a mindfulness practice at the very basic, we start with training the mind to come back again and again to an object of focus. And typically we choose our breath, right, in our mindfulness practice. And then we say, well, training ourselves to come back to the breath when the mind wanders away is the core practice, it is the fundamental. But as I was saying earlier, the missing ingredient for me way back then was to incorporate these attitudes, right? That John
mm,
Kabat-Zinn talks about, the seven attitudes, trust being one of them. But as you probably know, and I'm sure you do know, um, the seven attitudes are not it's not like a checklist, I mean, even though you're doing this podcast and dividing it up into 7 weeks, okay, that's to give it its due time and to introduce it more for our audience. But in practice, whether we are talking about uh, trust or non-judgment or any of the other attitudes, they come as a package, sometimes together, sometimes one of them, sometimes two or three of them. Okay. And it is really a question of when we practice, what is coming up for us. Okay. And if I'm going to put that in a simple example, right? When there's a difficult thought or a difficult emotion coming up, it's really quite easy for us to start judging our experience. For example, as one of your earlier sessions with Tony, I think you were talking about non-judgment, right? I think the example there is, I don't like this experience. It is not nice. Yeah, and I want to get rid of it,
mm,
right? And when we start having that thought and those discomforts come up and we try to push it away, then inevitably what actually comes up is more of such difficult thoughts and more of such difficult emotions.
mm,
And so the practice of coming back to our breath is really what is so nice about coming back to our breath. It is at best uneventful and at worst really boring and unpleasant, and you
mm,
get pins and needles, right? But the practice is, can we be with discomfort and still stay and um, align our action with what we intend, which is to pay attention on the breathing.
mm,
And in order to do this, can we maybe allow ourselves not to judge the experience, but be very curious about the experience?
mm,
Oh, okay. Interesting. My mind doesn't like this at all, does it? Oh, my mind prefers to go to dinner and plan, which restaurant to book for tonight. Interesting. But actually, what I'm intending to do right now is to come back to my breath,
mm,
right? And so when we keep practicing, we'll find that when we need it in life's really difficult moments, some moments that are much more difficult than sitting around watching your breath, then perhaps there is this muscle memory that allows us not to be caught up in that rumination, in that fighting of difficult feelings, but to come back and say, what do I really intend to do? I
mm,
intend to have that difficult conversation with a client, for example. I intend to prepare for this interview that I'm only half confident about. Okay, versus getting caught up in thoughts about um, self-criticism sometimes, we can be very harsh with ourselves, right? Or all sorts of things. Yeah. So
mm,
trusting the feelings is not pushing it away. It is actually training ourselves to be aware of them because our emotions are signals.
mm. I like that. This is about trusting our experience. Yeah, of course, some of our experiences can be difficult and uncomfortable and awkward, right? But therein is the practice. And it's sort of reconnecting and honoring the attitudes that we want to practice, right? So it's not just only the breath. It's not about the breath. It's about the attitudes that we are cultivating, the intention behind what we're actually practicing. That's what I'm getting from what you're sharing, Ming Hui. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
why don't we do a short practice, right? I mean, and you mind leading? I mean, we can learn from that experience. So you talk a lot about coming back to the breath, and why don't we have the audience practice with us, a short, maybe even just 2 to 3 minutes, and then we can see what comes up and we can process that. What do you think?
Sure. Yeah. Um, so perhaps what I might share is something that we call the three-step breathing space. It is one of the practices in uh, MBCT as well
Mm,
as mindfulness for life.
mm.
So let's just do this three-step breathing space. It's a short practice. Okay.
Okay, I'm your student. Let's go.
We are all students, honey.
Okay,
I'm a
yes, thanks for
student
the
too.
reminder.
Okay. So perhaps finding yourself a comfortable sitting position and just having a shift in your posture, perhaps as a reminder to ourselves of this intention for us to begin a practice. Is starting with an awareness, a gentle awareness, perhaps, of any thoughts that are circling in your mind, not needing to create thoughts, not needing to push them away either, but just see if we can simply be with our thoughts, aware of them. And if you happen to notice a busy mind, knowing that you do not need to judge it either, simply acknowledging it. Perhaps at this point, also noticing if some of these thoughts might carry an emotional charge with it, that it comes accompanied with emotions. So aware of these feelings, once again, not needing to judge it, not needing to change any of them, just simply being aware. Noticing perhaps that some of these feelings or emotions are felt in the body. Also dropping our awareness to the body and just noticing if any of the feelings are felt as tensions perhaps or tightness in a certain part of the body. And just acknowledging its presence, non-judging. And perhaps at some point, taking a slightly deep breath and allowing this breath to gather our scattered minds. So paying attention to the sensation of our breath as we draw an in-breath, sensing the air as it travels in through the nostrils, sensing the air flow down the back of the throat, perhaps sensing the rising of the abdomen as we breathe in, and the falling away of the abdomen as we breathe out. The air making its way out, the sensation in the chest, the throat, the nose. So no need to control our breathing, not even thinking about breathing, but just feeling it as a physical sensation. Down at the belly, that rising and falling away. Resting our awareness on the ebb and flow of the breathing, and letting this awareness of the breathing bring us back to the here and the now, to ground us, to center us. And if the mind wanders away, that's okay. As soon as we are aware, coming back to the breath, gathering the mind once again in this breath and this breath. And then when you're ready, expanding your awareness from the breath to the whole of the body that is seated here. Aware of the body sensations, perhaps aware of the space that we are taking up, just sitting here. And in this spatial awareness, expanding this awareness, feeling that space, and perhaps extending this spatial awareness to the next activity, to the rest of our day. So, whenever you're ready, if you had your eyes closed, you can open them, perhaps bringing back a little bit of warmth. You can rub your palms, okay, gentle stretches to the neck. And there you have it, 3 step breathing space.
Thank you, Ming Hui. 3 steps breathing. Yeah, I certainly got distracted and sort of coming back to your voice and the instructions and sort of reminding myself about what the attitudes and intention behind the practice, right? It's not just about the steps, it's the essence of the practice, something to remind ourselves as we spend the time. And how long was that practice? It wasn't too long, right? It was maybe a few minutes, 5 to 6 minutes.
Yeah, it's probably round about that. Yeah. I wasn't counting time, but really, perhaps the intent was to lead our audience through this simple 3 steps, which is, if I were to recap, starting with an acknowledgement of whatever is here, acknowledging our thoughts, our feelings, and how they are felt in the body. And just that's really giving ourselves permission to think and feel. Because even if we don't, our minds and our body will automatically, think and or feel anyway, right? And so when we acknowledge and accept, that's when we have a choice. And so if our a choice is to gather this scattered mind that is all over the place to one focal point, okay, then we can go along with that, right? And so that's why we say we gather the scattered mind with our breathing, coming back again and again to it. And that's where probably was when you said that you were distracted, and that's okay because there's always the next breath,
Mm,
breath by breath, right? And then when we are centered by the breath, what we do is we expand this zoomed in awareness, okay, to zoom out again into the broader awareness, starting with our own body, the space around us, and then um, we kind of re-engage, right? We re-engage in our case in this conversation.
mm,
And perhaps if we practice long enough, okay, and when I say practice, I mean having a mindfulness practice, not just this, 5, 6 minutes 3 step practice. But if we practice long enough, what we will start to find is this awareness of using the breath to ground ourselves so that even when I come back and engage with you, I am even more grounded than I was before. Yeah. And I don't know what the experience was for you, Han Yi, if you felt any difference before and after the 3 step breathing space.
well, definitely felt more calm and more, as you say, the word grounded, right? And being able to uh be more clearer. I think what the word I would use was that clarity
Mm.
of like what who I am and where I am and right now and some of the things I need to do later as well. Yeah.
Exactly, right? And so if we link back to our topic for the day, which is trust, okay, we didn't push away whatever feelings were there at the beginning of our practice, but we simply made space for it and know that these feelings are not there, to command us, but to signal to us that maybe we need a few moments of quiet, or maybe we need to go pour ourselves a cup of tea, or maybe we really do have to take a longer break, right?
Mm,
Yeah, it's a check-in, or maybe we say, oh, you know what? Why am I so worried about dinner? Dinner can take care of itself later when I'm done with this call, okay? So as long as we are aware, then we can access our basic wisdom to say what is most useful for me now. What do I
mm,
want to attend to now? Yeah.
mm. Great. Thank you very much, Ming Hui, for sharing your insights. And so for all the audience, as we start to wrap up, just a recap of some key ideas, right? So today we focus on trust as one of the key attitudes or 7 attitudes of mindfulness. This thing about tuning into our experience, our inner wisdom, and find ourselves grounding. And Ming Hui offered a short practice, so you can review the video if you want to use it as a resource to find that time. And all it took was maybe 5 to 7 minutes of your day to set aside to develop a consistent approach to the practice, as well as embodying the attitude that we are talking about here, right? And that will be how you can deepen your mindfulness practice. Okay, thank you very much, Ming Hui, for joining us today. My name is
Thank
Han Yi,
you.
and this is the Mindfulness Everything show, and hope to see you again. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.